Sarge, the first thing I'm interested in is when you first started skiing.
Well, I first started skiing in McCall, Idaho, which is 90 miles north of Boise, the capital. And I started skiing when I was 2 or 3 years old. My dad was a forest ranger, and I started skiing very young. And also, we skied to school. When I was in first grade, we skied 2.5 miles to school, and 2.5 miles home every day. We didn't have school buses, so we skied every day. And so I started skiing at a very young age. And that was a mode of transportation when we wanted to go someplace. And also we would ski out through the trees and did tree skiing on small slopes, and on the golf course. I had a golf course at that time, a very frugal, which it was, built in a small town, but we skied on that also.
When you were getting out of, let's say, high school level education, what did you do next?
Well, when I came out of high school, I was skiing all the time, period. And then I had a football scholarship to the University of Idaho. And I went to the University of Idaho, and ROTC was a land grant school, so we were supposed to take ROTC. So I knew my left foot from my right when I entered the Army, but then I played football also, freshman year. That's when the freshmen we had teams rather than also the varsity, where now the freshmen play with the varsity. But I skied and for the university and played football. Then in my sophomore year, I decided I would go in the Army. So I went into the Army, and from then on it was history.
What year would you have gone into the Army?
I went in the Army in late 1942, 43.
Had they started the 10th Mountain Division at
The 87th Regiment had been started, and it was at Fort Lewis, Washington, and they had been training on Mount Rainier. But they had a paraski unit in Utah, so I decided that I wanted to go to the paratroops. I wanted to get in the paraski unit, so I volunteered for the paratroops and went to Toccoa, Georgia for my training down south. And a young boy from McCall, Idaho, that had never been any place, and went to Toccoa, Georgia. And a little history on that, talk about abuse. That's when the old Army was in, and it's like the Special Forces today. If you couldn't hack it, they didn't want you. And the abuse you were taking was unbelievable. I learned every word that I never knew there was words, and that was the old Army. And that's the first time I had seen really black people, and that's when it was segregated. And you went into restaurants and sat in different places, and everything was, and I asked them why, and they'd said, "That's the way it is. You don't ask questions." I said, "Yes, sir, that's it." And so then when I graduated, we made a 90-mile march from Toccoa, Georgia to Fort Benning, forced march. I took my jump training at Fort Benning, my jumps. About that time, they made a jump of that paraski unit in Utah, and it was a disaster. And so they abandoned it, and so they sent me to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And that's when they were getting the draft was on full bore, and they were drafting all the people out of the South and they were sending them to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for basic. And they wanted me to stay there because I'd had training, and they needed people to train recruits from and inductees at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. So I stayed there and was training them, but I wanted to get out of there the worst way. And they said, no, you can't get out of here. But I had one ace in the hole, so I called my dad, and he knew a senator very well in Boise. And so he called him up, and so I was dispatched out of there about 2 weeks later to Camp Hale, Colorado. And I was very unpopular when I left Fort Jackson because they wanted me to stay there. And they said, your political pull will catch up with you someday, young man. And I said, fine, I wasn't worried about it. So I got on the train at Columbia, South Carolina, went to Denver, Colorado, and I was on a sleeper. I'd never heard of a sleeper on a train, and they sent me first class. One thing about it, I was on a sleeper. And I got off in Denver, Colorado, and I got off at the MPs, and I said, I'm supposed to go to Camp Hale, Colorado. And the MPs, that's how new Camp Hale was. They said, where is Camp Hale? I said, I don't know, that's where I'm supposed to go. So they sent me at the Cosmopolitan Hotel, downtown Denver. And I stayed there for a night and part of a day. And they come down and got me, and I got on the railroad station. Down at the railroad station, got on a train to Camp Hale. It was quite a shock, tell you. And so over in the mountains into the fog, I thought, but that wasn't fog, that was bad air. So I got up to Camp Hale, and they probably had the meanest railroad station man I ever met in my life. And I think he hated GIs. And so they had a little room there for the MPs. So the MPs were sitting there, and they said, so I showed them my orders, and they said, well, you are going to be in G prime. And I said, I don't know what G prime was. Well, that later became L company. So I said, fine. And so and they said, well, the barracks aren't finished. Of course, the bureaucracy hadn't inspected them yet. So I slept in a mule barn. The mules weren't there yet. So then they came and got me, and I went to L Company, which was G prime. And that's where the 87th Regiment was in camp at that time. But they had just finished the 85th and 86th barracks, and they were not organized at that time. So I went up, got into G prime, and we sooner than later we started getting all the recruits in, and that's when John Litchfield came in as a Dartmouth grad, and which I didn't know at that time, but I soon learned it. And so he was a second lieutenant, then was promoted to first lieutenant because he was a company commander. So John had ROT. I don't think John had ROTC training. He went to OCS, Officer Candidate School, and got his commission out there as a second lieutenant. And then he was shipped to Camp Hale, same as Bob Dole. Well, he was down in the 87th. He was commissioned.
What year was this? Yep.
I'm picking up
Late 43, 44?
When you arrived in
Yeah,
Camp Hale?
right.
So it was well established.
Oh yeah, it was well established, yeah, because at Cooper Hill, that's where they were training skiers up there that didn't know how to ski. Well, some of them knew how to ski, but they ran out of those also.
In the group that you were with, there had been some other groups there earlier that had some of the first, the Walter Prager and some
Right.
of those folks that had been involved.
Right.
Had they left at that point?
No,
or were
they
still there?
came back from Kiska. Remember, they were the 87th went to Kiska, and they came back and they were drifting back in there at that time. And that's when up at Cooper Hill, I'm sure you've heard of Cooper Hill, out of Leadville. That's where they did some training. That T-bar they put in there, the Army put that T-bar in and built those. Those were old CC barracks up there that we stayed in. And so so I went up, they found out that I could ski, and had a lot of experience in skiing. So they sent me to up to Cooper Hill to teach skiing. I thought, boy, I'm right back in my element again. That didn't last long because they started an NCO school, Captain Adams, down in the 86th Regiment, train on NCOs because the Army didn't have a lot of NCOs, and I was lucky or unlucky, and they said, aha, we'll take you out of the skiing and take you down to the NCO school with Captain Adams, the meanest captain I ever met in my life. And so everybody was dooley. So I was down at the NCO school and stayed there until came out on that first class, and then I went up to G Prime, which later become L Company, and I took over the weapons platoon, which was a light machine gun 60 mortar platoon, and then John Litchfield was the company commander.
This was the same John that you'd become familiar with before.
Yes, right.
In terms of the people you were meeting, was John the only Dartmouth guy that you came in contact with at that time? Or?
Yes, right. That's the only one that I knew at that time. But I knew that, then I later on knew that Percy Rideout was someplace because he and John Litchfield were big buddies, and I knew of that too. And then there was a Charlie McLean that later went, maybe I'll get ahead of myself on that. And so Percy, I don't know, he was someplace in the regiment or in the headquarters, but then when we'd trained all during the Camp Hale, when I was at Camp Hale, John Litchfield was our company commander, and he would go in all the problems and D series. But then when we finally got through the massive amount of training, John was transferred to division headquarters as G2 intelligence, and he stayed up there, and then Charlie McLean came in and took over the company. But John hasn't changed much from today. Do you know John?
I don't know John.
John, you ought to call John up sometime and talk to him on the phone and tell him who you are down, and I'll give you his phone numbers and talk to him. He's a piece of work. But but he was a good company commander. He was bright and he was tough, and I appreciated him.
At what point did your group get sent to Italy?
We went out when we went to Italy. We went on D series, and after D series it was over with, and as I mentioned before, we used to everybody we trained and overtrained, and it's like I brought out in some other interviews, what do we train them for? Nobody ever wants us. So then that's when we went to Italy, and General Hayes, commanding General Fifth Army, decide to take us, and so that's when we moved out to, and we went to Camp Hale. I went Camp Hale to Camp Swift.
And that was about 1944, late 44?
Yeah, in 45, late 44, 45, when we went to Camp Swift.
You may want to redo that and just incorporate bands, like,
Okay.
yeah. Let's make sure that, we get the complete.
As you were doing your training and as the folks started looking for ways to make use of your troops, what was the time frame in which you were being readied for actual action?
I'll back up on that a little bit too. We know we trained on D series. I'm sure you've all heard of D series, or maybe you know anything about the 10th Mountain Division. When we were going on D series, we'd go out for 2 weeks at a time, and that was where the whole division was out. The 85th, 86th, and 87th, and supporting units, the artillery and the weasels. And when we'd come back in off a D series, we thought we'd always go into the barracks and take showers, but they bivouacked in our mountain tents on the parade ground. And the only ones that could go into the barracks and take showers were the officers, and I haven't let John Litchfield forget that as of today. And so then after D series, anybody that wanted to could volunteer to get out of the division. They didn't want you if you didn't want to stay there. And so a lot of people volunteered to get out of the division, and some of them went to the Air Force, and they went all over. And then we also, the artillery at that time, the 75 pack howitzers were with us as supporting artillery. And we took all the mules to Camp Swift, and we moved out from Camp Swift, from Camp Hale to Camp Swift, the whole division. And we moved out a regiment at a time, the 85th, and was out first, and then they followed on 85, 86, and 87 at that time.
This was about, again, time frame wise, late 45.
Yeah, right,
You
45.
went through the D series, then
Right.
you went through the move to Camp Swift.
Right.
And then about, was it already 95, 45?
Right. When we,
moved to Italy?
right.
You may want to say something like, it's already 45 when we moved to Italy, or
It was early 45.
Yeah, early 45. Oh yeah, early 45 when we moved to Italy.
And how did that go? Was that...
Well, the move was great down there, but I'll tell you, when you went from 20 and 30 below zero at that altitude and moved to Camp Swift, Texas at 100 degrees out of Austin, it was out of Austin, Texas, the heat was unbelievable. The heat down in Texas at that time of year. So we'd go on 25-mile forced marches, and went 25 miles and stop every 5 miles, and drink a lot of water. But that was a tough program because of the altitude and the cold weather to go to that elevation, and hot weather. And also that's when all the mules were down there, and they unloaded them, and probably the mules were still there, some of them, because they all escaped when they unloaded them out of the box cars, the mule cars, or whatever they were called. And so they were out rounding up mules, and the observation planes were trying to find the mules, and we'd round them up. But a few of them escaped. But that was tough sledding there from Camp Hale to Camp Swift.
And when you were at Swift, and the orders came through to go to Italy, I mean, did you pack up everything again and move it along?
Oh yeah, he packed up everything again because each company, of course we got rid of those over there, but each company at Camp Hale and at Camp Swift had 9 mules. And that was to pack our mortars and the big mortars, and also the machine guns, the light machine guns, and the ammo. You carried a certain amount with you, but not in the mules. And they also carried all of our kitchen gear, all the stoves and all the utensils that went with the. But that was a good deal too, because when a mule ran off and kicked all of the gear off of it, then you could get twice as much. You know so they didn't know how much you had on the mules. But that was quite an experience down there. But that's when, at Camp Swift, is when we got rid of the mortars in my platoon, the mortars, and it was only machine guns and BARs. And that's when I become first sergeant of the company at Camp Swift, Texas. I was promoted from sergeant first class to first sergeant at Camp Swift, Texas. That's when they formed M Company. That was a heavy weapons company that took the heavy mortars and 80 millimeter mortars and 50 caliber machine guns. And the first sergeant of Dick Cochran, who was from New England and from Vermont, I think, took over that company, and I took over L Company as first sergeant.
Now,
I'm just gonna mix up the shot here. Go ahead, Drake. Yeah.
when you were in charge of L Company and and they were calling for the troops to go to Italy, was that a very sudden move? Was it a move that was planned? I mean, was all the previous work that you'd done on the D-Series and Swift and so forth, was that organized towards Italy?
Yeah,
They knew where you were going?
Yeah, we knew where we were going, right.
And you got to Italy and fairly quickly got into battle, if I understood the history.
Oh yeah, we landed real quickly and down at Piazza, on the water. And it's interesting. Of course, you probably don't want to put this in a film, but you can cut it out. But when we went through Rome, and all the little kids wave out the windows, "Hey, GI, my mother is a virgin. Come in." And but we went through up to that area and then on up north to the. Through Italy and up through the Po Valley. And
now, I know a little bit of the history of those battles, and they were pretty brutal from everything I could read. I know you have had a few wounds in your life. Was that one of the places?
Right.
Was that early on, or?
No, I got hit at Della Teresia, and then I got hit in the Po Valley.
Now, as you were going through that part of your time with L Company, were there any Dartmouth folk involved with you there?
No, not that I know of.
Litchfield was still the company commander?
No, Litchfield was up at G2, up in G2. Division headquarters. Right, he was
Charlie McLean?
Charlie McLean was our company commander at that time. And then, after we got in over in Italy, then Captain Boddington took over. He lives now, I think, in Brattleboro, Vermont.
But not a Dartmouth guy?
No.
you got your second wound, were any of these the kind of thing that were going to end up shipping you back to the States at that point?
Right, when I got hit the last time, I got a lot of shrapnel in me, and I still have shrapnel around my heart. I still have a piece right here. And it's interesting, after Roe and I have been married for years, in my arm here, this shrapnel still was coming out of my arm. That rocks and shrapnel, but I still have those 5 pieces around my heart and lungs that they wouldn't take out because they didn't want to go in from the chest. So when I have X-rays, that's the first thing I want to know, what is all that metal in there? But it's never moved. The doctors told me that it would never move. So, and it hasn't.
And you, at that point, then you came back to the States?
Right, and I was down at Fitzsimmons Hospital.
And this was early 45.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. But I got hit the last time. No, this was the last time I got hit. The war was I was in the hospital and the last time I got hit, the war was over. I don't know, just a matter of days later.
I guess they didn't like the fact that you wouldn't be there.
God, boy, I'll tell you, I couldn't believe it.
So you came back to the States and had a recuperation period of time.
Right, I came back to the States, and that's when they put in Circular 21. And I wanted to stay in the Army because it was a great place, and I learned a lot, and I wanted to stay in the Army. And so they wanted to send me to rehab, and I said, no, I'm in pretty good shape. So I joined the reserves, and I went home to my hometown of McCall, Idaho, and I had to go to Boise every year, and every month take a physical. So when I was ready to go back in the Army, and so I had to.
So you could go into the reserves and still be a potential returnee to active duty.
Right, because I could have stayed in the reserves or in the Army and went to rehab, but then I could stay in the reserves, which I did, and take this physical every month at Boise, and so then when I was ready to go back on active duty, when the doctors would clear me, I could go back to that time. And during that time at McCall, Idaho, I started that ski team up there, which was the Mighty Might ski team, and we started skiing competition all over, and all over the Idaho and Oregon and Washington, and also Lee Backus. He was in the 10th Mountain Division and later got himself in trouble, but he was a coach of the Bogus Basin Ski Club, and we were down in Bogus. I had the kids down in Bogus Basin right out of Boise, Idaho, and Lee Backus and myself are the ones that started the Junior Nationals. We are the ones that started, and I have all, which they do, I have all the documentations on them, I have all the books, and we are the ones that started the Junior Nationals, and which is one of the main training tools for the U.S. ski team today. And so then the Junior Nationals, so then it was on, and we had competition, and then the first national championships on that outrunning was held at Mount Rose in Reno, Nevada.
This, again, time-wise, was
during my recuperation.
46, 47?
Yeah, right, 47, 48, right. And so then a kid named Muddy Numbers and Mac Miller later become a famous cross-country runner, out of Western State. He went to Western State, and they won the first national championships at Mount Rose in Reno, Nevada.
Just checking time, because I think probably have to try and wrap up around 6, I would think.
6.
Is it?
Okay.
You want some more water?
No, I'm fine, babe.
Steve, you want some more water?
That would be great, yeah.
As long as you're getting
Do I
some, I'll
have
have some,
to,
babe.
maybe I have the wrong time. Do I have the time? It's about 5:30,
Yeah, I got
26.
26 minutes to 6. That's good.
The thing that I think would be,
You got to call. I come and get my Dartmouth training in those slugs
Right.
up there.
correct.
And
You might,
Thanks,
you tell me if there's
No, thank
something
you.
that we
I
should
can't get you another
be
beer.
talking
No.
to, but I'm thinking maybe we should go to
Thank
the,
you,
to
though.
the assignment to Dartmouth and the ROTC,
Mm.
and also any exposures you had to the folks that were starting the Aspens and the Vails.
Yeah, well, that's true. It's the same way with, after recuperation. Of course, you don't have to put that in there, but after recuperation, I got was assigned down to Fort Ord, California, and then about that time, the Korean conflict come aboard, and that's when I went to Korea. But that's another chapter. I'm sure you don't want to hear anything about that. So, on that political fiasco.
I'm sure you'd have some salty comments to make.
I
on
have
that.
a lot of salty comments on that whole thing. Well, I made that Incheon landing. I went in with A Company of the 1st Marines at Incheon, and and we ran all the North Koreans and out of that over the border, and then I got trapped in that Chosin Reservoir mess. If you know anything about history of the Korean War and that Chosin Reservoir mess, I got trapped into that mess up there. And to get myself out of that mess.
When did you stay with the Korean War all the way through it, or did you leave?
No, I got hit there, and the last time I got hit, I came back to the States.
So that would have been early 50s.
Yeah, right.
And so you come back to the States, another recuperation period.
Right.
And when you came out of that recuperation period, what was the assignment there? Is that when you went to Alaska?
No, then I went to Fort Carson, Colorado. I went to Fort Carson and trained down there. And we trained Special Forces up at Camp Hale. And
So Camp Hale still.
oh yeah, they originated. Well, no, they tore it down, but they were living in Quonset huts. It was tore down right after the war, and we had Mountain Training Center was at the headquarters in Fort Carson, but we had all of our training up at Camp Hale, and we trained Special Forces and Marines, and if you want to come back to that, that's also, the Marines and the Air Force, Mountain Corps training them as a spin-off of the 10th Mountain Division into they have a training program now. So and that was spin-off of it also.
When you went through, if I understood correctly, you moved to Dartmouth in 1958.
Right, I came out of Alaska.
Okay, and I think you mentioned that there was a particular assignment that you had at Dartmouth with the ROTC program that you were.
Right, when I was up in Alaska, and I was up at Fort Greely, and I'll just give it a quick summary on that. I was up at Fort Greely, which is the northern part of Alaska, which is where the first atomic power plant was built. and so we were stationed there at Mountain and Cold Weather Training Command, and we were training NATO troops out of there also. And so then after that, after that assignment, if you recall in a little history on Fort Greely, that's where at Big Delta, that's where it was, out of Fairbanks, 90 miles north of Fairbanks on the Canadian border. That's where the Americans dropped the bombers on and refueling. That's when the Russians picked them up to fly over the hump into Russia. And so we lived in those Quonset huts on that old landing field up there, like combat. And so then he finally built some barracks for us, but that was coal stoves and all the rest of it up there. And so, but then that's when they started the Army biathlon team. They had one at Camp Hale, but then Fort Greely, then down at Fort Rich, out of Fort Greely, the skiers came out of there. They were trying to take some to start an Army biathlon team, and they wanted me to stay there with that. And I said, no, there isn't enough money to send another tour in Alaska. But that's when this assignment came up there. They had two assignments. I could have gone to the mountain, starting this ROTC mountain training at Dartmouth College, or I could have gone to Sergeant of the Army, which before they had sergeant majors. And so General Hay, who was a three-star general, and he was our battalion commander as a major, and then went on to headquarters lawyer to become a general. I called him up and he said, don't go to this fog or come to this fog factory. That's the Pentagon. He said, take that job at Dartmouth. And I said, fine. And as I said, that's the best job I've ever had in the Army. It was a fantastic job. I never enjoyed so much of anything in my life as that job up there. It was terrific working with those kids. And to start out with, and as I mentioned yesterday, it was my first indoctrination with the New Englanders, and so we had our headquarters down in College Hall, and so I had ordered all this equipment coming in, ropes and pitons and weapons and everything to do with pitons. People, they didn't even know what they were up there, and some of the outing club did. They knew they were climbers. And all the nylon ropes and all the climbing gear and weapons, and I ordered mortars, 60 mortars and BARs, and so so we were in there, and so Mr. Poor was our custodian or whatever he was, and I said to him, he introduced himself. He said, I'm Mr. Poor, the property management for all ROTC. And I said, yes, sir. I said, well, in the Army we call them supply sergeants. Well, he said, I'm the property manager. And I said, okay, good, terrific. So I started unpacking all this gear and putting it together and inventorying it. It had come out of First Army, and it said I had all this crates and stuff all over the floor, and I started cleaning it up, and he said, no, we have people to do that. And I said, okay, bringing those janitors in here to clean up this mess. And he said, Sergeant, I'll have you know they ain't janitors, they are custodians. So I learned a new word in New England. A janitor was a custodian. I said, okay, we'll bring them in here. And so then the room they gave me was a dingy room, and so I said, well, I'll paint it. So I got all the stuff ready and going to paint it, and he said, you ain't painting that room, Sergeant. I said, well, we need it painted. It's a dingy looking place. I said, why don't we get it painted and clean up this mess? He said, well, we ain't going to do it right now, but I'll have it done. I said, okay, fine. So we got the room painted, and then I said, well, do we have carpenters to build all these shelves? And he said, we ain't going to do that very fast, but we'll have it done. I said, okay, and so we did. So everything was inked. I said, good, terrific. And he and I become very good friends after that.
Do you think that was a New England attitude?
Well, I don't know what it was.
They would do it, but they would first
Yeah, but they were going to do it at their own slow pace, and they would have it done. Another thing, when I got up there, I always voted. Wherever I was, I wanted to vote. And so I went down to the voting poll place to register, and I was in my uniform, full boat, and I went down and I walked in there and had all these tables set up in this room, and they pointed me over to this table here, and there was a gentleman sitting behind the table. I said to him, I said, I would like to register to vote, you know, tell you where I live and so on and so forth. He said, American citizen? I said, yes, sir, I'm in the Army. I said, on my uniform, I said, just checking if you're an American citizen. I said, okay. So my thing was from property custodian to custodian to down to you an American. So I figured, well, that's a good start here. And now I'm learning stuff real fast, the New England program here. It was interesting.
It occurs to me that during the time, the 8 years or so that you were in Hanover, is the time that is the backdrop for a very significant bit of movie and now book activity called Animal House.
Yeah, right.
Did you have any dealings with any of those
No, I haven't.
kinds of characters?
I don't think so. But I'll tell you, the people I had to deal with was the finest. Those kids were the finest kids I've ever had to deal with. They were great. They only had to show them once or twice, and that's all. And as I said before, I could teach them in 2 hours what it teach some of the other people 2 weeks or 2 days to learn what they could do. They were eager, and they were always trying to outdo one another, and they were one thing they learned from me was to be on time, and they learned that real fast, and it was good. I appreciated those kids, and it's like today I hear from a lot of them. It's like, you know, which is I really relish much is all the Dartmouth people today recognized at the ROTC program there. And as I mentioned previously, is that Dartmouth was the last school in the East every year in readings, and after 2 years they were the top school in the East because of the training, and they had brought a couple other combat officers in, and I could say something else, but I'm very sad about some of them. But anyway, there was. And it was good, and sometimes I got in trouble with the colonel, and but being too hard on the cadets. But they learned and they respected it, and today I hear from a lot of them, as of today too, and in Dartmouth and Hanover, very dear to me in my lifetime. And also the Campions. You remember the Campions store? Jim Campion and I become very good friends. And you don't have much money in the Army. And he used to sell me all, I had to get all of my civilian clothes, and he used to sell me it all at his cost and let me pay on time, which was, you know, and it was great. And the people in Hanover and the staff at Hanover treated me from Mr. Dickey down to Herb West and John Meck and all the rest of them were really fantastic.
Do you have any
Steve, one thing, could you, yeah,
John Sloan Dickey, Herb West, John Meck are big names in the history of Dartmouth.
Oh, they're great,
And
fantastic people.
what was your view of each of them, or?
You know, they you know what I liked about them, not because I was in the Army and was recognized as such, probably more than anybody in the ROTC program, because of the Mountain Training Center. There was only one in the United States Army. They had a school at Norwich University over. It was an army or an academy over there, but Dartmouth, it was the only, through Minnie Dole, it was the only school in the United States that had a mountain training center in the school, and those people recognized that and recognized the cadets. We had special uniforms and berets, and they recognized the fact. And I put on rock climbing demonstrations over, and all the Parents' Day would come over and see all those kids climb. And they narrated. I had the narration all typed up and written, and we used to practice, and they did all the narration of it, and I have pictures of it, and evacuations with litters, and rappelling, and bringing the wounded off of the rocks, like the same way in combat, and rope bridges and high lines. And those cadets do it all. And they narrated it all over microphones and speakers. They were fantastic, those kids. And
Was there any connection to the Krell operation in Hanover?
right down in,
Cold regions?
oh yes, they were, you know, there was testing. They did a lot of testing. And, but I went down to Natick once in a while, but we had nothing directly with them. And once in a while, they had some piece of clothing they would give us. But Natick, they were a separate. That worked out in Natick, Mass, and they're still there. But I understand there's some politics in that right now.
Did you? One of the big events back then was Winter Carnival.
Oh God, yes.
Was that something you enjoyed seeing?
Fantastic.
The statues and
You know, boy.
make sure you incorporate the Winter Carnival in your answer.
Yeah, the Winter Carnival was just, I couldn't believe it. The first year I was at Winter Carnival, and it was something. All the statues and all the work that the people went into to put that on, and it was fantastic. But then in later years, I had those cadets out there working on helping it too, on the volunteer part of it. They didn't volunteer. I volunteered for it, out there to work and work on the Winter Carnival. It was a great institution.
Did you get involved in the skiway in any way?
Right, the skiway. On the skiway, I was up there skiing and a lot, and also when they had ran races up there, I volunteered to put in the communications for their races, for the cadets to give them training for running a wire. Of course, then it was all sound power phones. They wouldn't need it today with all the cell phones, and everybody has one in his ear. But we ran the race, set up their timing equipment, and put the starts in for them, and worked on the courses, and packed the courses, and they were involved in the races. And in later time, we went other places and did the timing for races and worked the cadets with it.
Did you have anything to do with the ski jump operation?
Not much out there. A little. We worked on the landings, but very little on that. We didn't have too much to do. We worked some on it, but not that much. We had, one thing about it, when we did have transportation, that's one thing the college or the Army gave us. They gave us. I got a couple of sedans, and I had a truck, and so there I had money to transport these kids wherever I went. It was nice. But the college liked the program. They thought it was fantastic.
In terms of people that came to Dartmouth during the time you were there any sons of soldiers that you had known in the past?
Not that I know of, no. Not that I know of.
I mean, one of the young men that was there in the 61, 65 period of time was Dick Dorrance Jr.
Oh, yeah, right. I knew Dick Dorrance Jr., but I didn't know him.
Did you know Senior?
Oh, yeah, Dick and I were very good friends. I knew him very well. In fact, Dick Dorrance and I were inducted in the Colorado Ski Hall of Fame at the same time. Oh, yeah, I knew Dick very, very well. And I had pictures of it, and I gave it to the Colorado. Adrian Bouchard, the photographer, was a good friend of mine, too. I have a lot of pictures he gave me, and he was a great guy. And also I had a picture of when Dick Dorrance shoots the head wall, and then he signed it, and I gave it to Colorado Ski Hall of Fame.
Senior?
Mm-hmm.
I happen to have known Adrian Bouchard as well.
Oh, do you? Adrian is a great guy. He's he took all those pictures that I have, babe. It's terrific.
Yeah. In fact, I was going through his files not too many years ago looking for shots of
I have all that.
Dartmouth from
I have
that
big
period
frame
of time.
pictures, and I have a museum. My house used to be a museum, and it's, of course, now I've given a lot of stuff away. And changing the subject, that's what they're going to do. I have about probably 150 trophies and memorabilia from back when, and they're going, well, like Sarge's shoulder up here, but they're going to take all that and build big trophy cases up at all the restaurants, and Jensen's going to take all that, come over and get it, and display it all in the restaurants locked up.
Did you go to any of the football games back then?
Oh, I went to all of them. That was terrific.
What did you think of the Dartmouth Indian?
Fantastic. I loved it.
What, I would incorporate that in your answer.
Yeah, the Dartmouth Indian. Oh yeah, it was fantastic. I loved it. It was terrific. Oh yeah, I went to all the football games. And Bob Blackman, the coach, yeah, it was terrific. Oh yeah, I loved it. I had special tickets to the football games.
In the small world it is, I was one of those Dartmouth Indians that
Oh, you were?
along the way, yeah.
Oh, is that so? Oh, that was great. I loved that. That was terrific. I can remember also the football game when they were, what was it, Cornell had those, kicking those field goals, and Blackman lined up all the people that blocked the field goals and made the pyramid up here to get them out of the, to block their kicks. Oh yes, I was, and that undefeated Dartmouth team that won the Lambert Trophy, the high-powered school in the East, the football team.
That's right.
But it was terrific.
And with your background in football, that must have been a
It was
you had skiing and football.
Oh yeah, it was
Those
great.
were
It was
big things.
terrific. It was really something. I loved it. And I went down to the football games away and everything. It was terrific. The reason I liked Dartmouth so much, it wasn't a concrete and paved school. You know, I went up to the, the outing club, and their houses are up on, and also, Harvard and Princeton and Columbia, and all of them are all concrete and asphalt schools.
Conscious of the time, we're probably.
You got 10 minutes of tape. No, I got another tape.
Is there anything from the 40s and 50s when the ski areas that were being started in this part of the world that involved people that you knew that were Dartmouth people? I mean, you've known a number of Dartmouth people, and certainly I know Percy was involved with Aspen.
Yeah,
and Dick Dorrance was involved with Aspen. But were there any others that?
Well, John Litchfield. John Litchfield was helped start up with Aspen too. You know, he and Percy Rowdout and McLean, they're, you know, they one that really started the Red Onion over at Aspen. And then that was later. It wasn't. He was this Werner Kuster bought it. He was a Swiss that came over here, and he was at Mountain Training Center at Camp Carson, and now it's Fort Carson. And when he was an instructor in climbing, he wasn't a very good skier, but he was a Swiss, and then he later bought that restaurant from Percy and McLean and Litchfield that helped start that restaurant over there.
Is that still going?
Oh yeah, it's going. Werner's not. He hadn't had it anymore, but oh yeah, it's still going. We have the Red Onion. Well, you know, it's the same way with talking about 10th Mountain Division and that, Steve. When I was up at Camp Hale, I used to go up to Aspen and wash dishes at the Jerome Hotel, and lived in that barracks up there, and skied at Aspen when the tugboat went up and the tugboat came down. They had those sleds, one up and one come down. And Werner Kuster, before he was in the Army, was a chef with Arnold Sin, another Swiss at Aspen, and I used to go over there and wash dishes to get a ski lift ticket and meals over there on weekends.
Was that in your Camp Hale days?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh, sure. In the Army.
Is there anybody else, again, any other names that you can think of that were 10th Mountain, Dartmouth connection, either went to Dartmouth or like a Walter Prager that was the ski coach there that then...
No, not that I know of, no. Probably there were some, I'm sure of that along the way. But mine had been all in Aspen and Vail, but not offhand, no sir.
And when you were here in Vail, were there any Dartmouth connections that you were dealing with here?
No.
Okay.
Tell us, or tell Steve a funny story about Litchfield.
Well, Litchfield. Roy has to start laughing. Litchfield, and you know, let me tell you something. You know, when Litchfield was the company commander, John Litchfield, you know, the officers lived like a bunch of dogs in their barracks. So we had and he denies this, but I know exactly, and I remind him one day when he had his wife up there, and he's top down on his Chrysler, the old Woody Chrysler. We had to go over and clean. The companies had a rotation, and I happened to be, the company, and over in my platoon was over cleaning his barracks. We had to clean the officers' barracks. They were such a mess. He denies that, and then I told him, I said, how would I have met your wife? And you remember that Chrysler you had, that convertible? It was in July. It was hot, I think July or August, because the top was down, and you had your wife there because she came up to get you, and your wife was waiting for you, and we got over there to clean your barracks. He said, oh, it didn't happen. I said, oh, yes, don't tell me. I said, well, how would I know this? I'm supposed to make it up. I said, if you remember, there was a roster in the orderly room detailed of cleaning up BOQs. And I said, I happened to be there that time. He said, well, and then he stumbles on that one. And so then, you know, up here we had talking about the Hall of Fame, and Litchfield and Bob Parker and myself are on this panel. And Litchfield, God, he gets a talking. Do you know him at all?
No.
Do you know him? He talks, you might as well say, today the sun is shining. and it's shining bright, and he'll say, no, it isn't. So he'll go on for 30 minutes and tell me why it isn't shining. So then he gets on the phone, and you cannot say one word, because you ask him a question, there's no way you can ever get an answer because he's talking. So one of my last conversations with him is said, so we're talking about Hail and Farewell as the last reunion in Denver, because the Camp Hale is now, you know, they're all dying off, all the veterans. And so it's Hail and Farewell. So he's on that committee, and I had to write an article about training, so I did. So I wrote an article down to earth, which it was, real training. So at the end of it, and I knew he had changed it all, so at the end of it I put Command Sergeant Major, retired. God, he called me up, and Rose laughing, called me up and said, you don't sign it that way. And I said, why don't I sign it? That's what I retired for. Command Sergeant Major, retired. He said, you weren't then. They never even had it in the Army at that time. He said, you were a first sergeant. And I said, that's right, John. Well, he said, that's the way you sign it. He said, I'm going to change it. I said, whatever blows your skirt up, do anything you want, John. So he said, well, I'm going to rewrite this whole thing. And I said, what do you know about it? You never saw a shot fired in anger. I said, you sat up there in your duff in division headquarters and gave orders. You never even was out there. I said, probably got a combat infantry badge because they gave it to her, and then he really got on me. And I said, well, it's the truth. So anyway, we dropped that one. And so anyway, he left the article the way I wrote it, but he did sign First Sergeant, retired. He said, you don't sign that. He said, you weren't a sergeant. I said, whatever blows your skirt up. So anyway, so then the last thing. So this goes on forever. Every time he calls, he wants to know something. So I try and tell him, and that's impossible. So the last thing, so they said, so we have all this Hail and Farewell down there. And he said, so I said, John, he said, you're going to stay at that hotel, aren't you? And I said, no. I said, long time ago, I said, when I got out of the Army, John, there's a few things I won't do. And I said, stand in line, ride a bus, and in one little hotel room, and eat in buffets. I said, I don't do that. Oh, God, he exploded. And I said, well, that's the way it is, John. I don't do that. So then he said, well, do what you want to do. I said, I will, don't worry about it. So then, down there, I know the general managers of Hampton Inn Suites. And so when I stay in Denver, this one down there, I know him very well. So I have a special suite room. I do fireplaces and the whole terrific place. And it's not far from where they're having this at Denver Tech Center. So I said, so I knew I'd get John, so it's going to cost $250 to register each, so that's $500. And I said, John, I said, what do I get out of this $500 I'm going to get? He said, what do you want? I said, I'm asking you a question. I said, you're on this committee. You're a big gunner. Let me know what I'm supposed to get out of this thing. Well, you'll get something. And I said, well, I know that. I said, you're on the committee. Don't you have a list? He said, well, you'll get something. That's all he could say. I said, okay. So then he said to me, he said, I suppose you're going to, he said, I suppose you're going to stay at that hotel. I said, no, John, I'm not going to stay at that hotel and stay in a single room and have a drink on my bed. I said, I quit that a long time ago. I'm not doing that anymore. He said, well, where are you staying? I said, I'm staying over at the Hampton Inn and Suites. Well, he said, God damn it, don't even come. I said, I will, don't worry. He said, no, I don't want you to come. He said, there are a lot of people here who've heard about you and they want you here, but he said, don't come. I said, okay. So that's a conversation, one of my last ones with John. That was about a week or so ago.
A week or so ago.
Oh yeah, he calls me up all the.
If you could state your full name and do we have permission to use this interview? And Steve?
This is William R. Brown Jr. and you have permission to use this tape as whatever you desire to.